You've seen the Mississippi 100 times. A brown line down the middle of a map. The river from the school books. You think you know what it is. You don't. It isn't a line on the land. It's a living thing that moves, buries its own history, and does not want to be where it is. A city bigger than London once stood on its banks and vanished. And in 1812, the river briefly ran backward. So here are 30 facts about the Mississippi that prove almost everything you think you know about it is wrong. Real, documented, and almost impossible to believe. And the last one is the strangest, because the river you see on every map has been quietly trying to escape for 70 years. Let's dive in. 30. The fake name. Lake Itasca, the source of the Mississippi. You'd assume the name is ancient, an Ojibwe word passed down for centuries. It isn't. In 1832, a U.S. official named Henry Schoolcraft coined Itasca from the Latin veritas caput, true head, filed down until it sounded native. But the people who actually lived there already had a name for it: Elk Lake. Schoolcraft wanted to plant a flag on the map, so he manufactured a word. America's greatest river begins at a lake with a counterfeit name. 29. Step over it. Picture the Mississippi and you picture something a mile wide, churning and brown. At its source, you could cross it without wetting your knees. Where the river leaves Lake Itasca, it runs barely 20 to 30 feet across and shin deep. A clear creek with stepping stones laid out for tourists. And it doesn't even head south. It flows north first, then east, wandering for miles before it ever turns toward the Gulf. The mightiest river in America begins by walking the wrong way. 28. Not the longest. Every classroom map sells the Mississippi as America's longest river. It isn't. By the USGS, the Missouri runs about 2,540 miles to the Mississippi's 2,340, roughly 200 miles longer. The river you were taught to revere is the shorter half of its own system. Stitch the two together, and the Missouri-Mississippi stretches some 3,700 miles, fourth longest on Earth. The famous one is outranked by the tributary that feeds it. The Mississippi is the legend. The Missouri is the length. 27. Found, then lost. You'd think a river this size, once seen, would stay on the map. It didn't. A Spanish expedition crossed the Mississippi in 1541 and named it the River of the Holy Spirit. Then Europe lost it. For the next 132 years, no European is recorded reaching it again, until the French paddled in from the north in 1673. The people who lived there never lost it, of course. They'd long called it Mississippi, Great River. Europe found the Mississippi, then forgot it for over a century. 26. The drain pipe. Stand on the bank and you're not really looking at a river. You're looking at the drain for most of a continent. The Mississippi's watershed pulls water from 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces. About 1.2 million square miles, roughly 40% of the lower 48. Rain that falls in Montana, New York, and New Mexico can all end up in the same channel, sliding past Memphis. It isn't a river that runs through America. America drains into it. 25. The town it left. Build a city on a river, and you'd assume the river stays put. Greenville, Mississippi found out otherwise. For decades, it was one of the busiest ports on the lower Mississippi, until 1933, when the river jumped its channel at Tarpley Bend and simply moved on. It left Greenville sitting on Lake Ferguson, a 10-mile crescent of still dead water. The wharves went quiet. The boats stopped coming. A town built entirely on the Mississippi woke up one season to find the river gone. 24. The wrong side. You'd assume you can always reach your own state from inside it. In one spot, you can't. The Kentucky Bend is a teardrop of Kentucky wrapped almost entirely inside a single loop of the Mississippi, pinned against Missouri and Tennessee. To drive there from the rest of Kentucky, you have to leave the state, cross through Tennessee, and curl back in. Around 9 people live inside the loop. A surveyor's line and a river's curve cut a scrap of one state off from the country it belongs to. 23. Spilled ribbons. Look at the Mississippi on a map and it seems fixed. One firm line drawn down the country. In 1944, a geologist named Harold Fiske proved it never was. Mapping the lower Mississippi for the Army Corps, Fiske reconstructed every path the river had taken over thousands of years and layered them in overlapping bands of color. The result looks like spilled ribbons. a river that had swung back and forth across its whole valley, restless and constant. The line on your map is just where it happens to be standing today. 22. The staircase. The upper Mississippi looks like a river flowing freely downhill. It's actually a staircase. A chain of 29 locks and dams turns the river above St. Louis into a series of stair-stepped pools, each held deep enough for barges. Down that ladder moves an enormous load, hundreds of millions of tons of grain, coal, and steel every year, the freight spine of American farming. Half the Mississippi isn't really a river anymore. It's a working machine that happens to be wet. 21. The amputation. We talk about taming the Mississippi as if it meant building walls beside it. In the 1930s, the Army Corps did something far more drastic. Under General Harley Ferguson, they carved straight channels through the river's biggest bends, one after another. 14 artificial cutoffs in barely a decade. Together, they sliced roughly 132 miles off the lower Mississippi. The severed loops were left to die as oxbow lakes. We didn't just wall the river in. We cut pieces out of it and threw them away. 20. The Pirate Cave. You think of the river as a highway for settlers and cargo. For a while, it was also a hunting ground. At Cave-In Rock, a wide stone mouth in the Illinois Bluffs, river bandits set up a hideout in the 1790s and early 1800s. The stories, part record, part frontier legend, tie it to killers like the Hart brothers and the outlaw Samuel Mason, who lured in flatboats and stripped the crews of their cargo. How organized it ever was, no one's sure. But the American frontier had a coastline, and that coastline had a pirate cave. Quick pause. We're about a third of the way down, and it only gets stranger from here. If the river surprised you so far, hit subscribe so the next one finds you. And if you live along the Mississippi, if you grew up on it, work it, or just know a stretch of it better than I ever will, drop the fact I'm bound to have missed in the comments. I read everyone. Alright, back to the river. 19. A depth warning. You know Mark Twain as one of America's great writers. You probably don't know the name is a riverboat distress call. On the Mississippi, a leadsman stood at the bow dropping a weighted line, shouting the depth so the hull wouldn't tear open on a hidden sandbar. Mark Twain meant 2 fathoms, 12 feet, the shallow edge of safe water, the cry that warned danger was close. Samuel Clemens took it as his pen name. The funniest writer in America named himself after the sound of the river turning dangerous. 18. A buried conquistador. Hernando de Soto spent years marching across the South, telling the native nations he met that he was an immortal god. In 1542, somewhere along the river he had reached, he died of fever. His men faced a problem. If the people he'd deceived found the body, the lie died with him. So under cover of darkness, they weighted his corpse and sank it into the Mississippi. The first European to cross the Great River ended up hidden inside it, drowned to protect a fiction. 17. Bigger than London. Ask where America's first great city was, and no one says Illinois. But around the year 1100, the largest city in what is now the United States sat on the Mississippi floodplain near present-day St. Louis. Cahokia held some 20,000 people, more than London at the time, across more than 100 earthen pyramids. The biggest, Monk's Mound, has a wider base than the Great Pyramid of Giza. By the 1400s, it had emptied and been forgotten, a metropolis on the river that almost no American is taught existed. 16. The worst wreck. You picture the country's deadliest shipwreck out on the open ocean. It was on a river north of Memphis. On April 27, 1865, the steamboat Sultana, crammed with freed Union prisoners at 6 times its legal capacity, blew its patched boilers and burned. Estimates of the dead run from about 1,200 to 1,800. By most counts, more than the Titanic. But it happened the same week the Civil War ended, so the country barely looked up. America's worst day on the water, swallowed by the headlines. 15. Cliffs of dust. The tall, pale cliffs above the river at Vicksburg and Natchez look like solid rock. They're not. They're packed dust, loess, ground to powder by Ice Age glaciers and blown into drifts tens of feet deep. Some of the thickest, lowest deposits on Earth sit along the lower Mississippi, rich enough to grow the cotton economy, soft enough to carve with a shovel. The Grand Bluffs guarding the river are a frozen dust storm, blown in from the last ice age and never cleared. 14. A young river. The The Mississippi feels timeless, like it's run since the dawn of the continent. The river you know is barely a blink old. When the great ice sheets melted around 11,000 years ago, walls of glacial meltwater tore open the valley the river now fills and set its modern course. Before that, the drainage looked nothing like today's map. The water is ancient. The arrangement is brand new. The Mississippi has held its current path for only a sliver of geologic time. 13. The Buried Sea. The Gulf of Mexico didn't always end where it does now. It once reached hundreds of miles farther north, roughly up to the Cairo, Illinois area, where the Ohio joins today. Over millions of years, the river packed that ancient arm of the sea with sediment, filling some 35,000 square miles of old seabed into the flat lowland geologists call the Mississippi Embayment. The lower Mississippi doesn't run toward an ocean so much as across the grave of one. The delta is just the part of the burial that isn't finished. 12. A continental scar. The river's path through the Mid-South isn't random. It follows a wound. Buried under the floodplain is the Reelfoot Rift, a place where North America began tearing itself in half hundreds of millions of years ago and then stopped. The split never finished, but the weakened seam stayed, and the river settled into the low ground it left behind. That same hidden fault is why the earth here still shakes. The Mississippi is riding the stitched-up scar of a continent that almost came apart. 11. Bells in Boston. The most violent earthquakes in the recorded history of the eastern United States didn't strike a coast. They struck the Mississippi. In the winter of 1811 into 1812, the New Madrid Fault in Missouri unleashed a series of shocks estimated between magnitude 7 and 8, felt across roughly 2 million square miles. Church bells rang on their own in Boston, 1,000 miles away. Chimneys fell in Cincinnati. President Madison felt it in the White House, all from a fault most Americans don't know exists. 10. Rivers that won't mix. Where two big rivers meet, you'd expect them to merge into one. They don't, not right away. At Cairo, Illinois, the green-tinged Ohio runs straight into the brown Mississippi, and the two refuse to blend. You can see the seam down the middle of the channel, one color on each side, holding the line for 10 to 30 miles before they finally mix. Because their speed, temperature, and sediment all differ. Two rivers, one bed, sharing it without touching. 9. The electric fence. You wouldn't expect to find an electric fence inside a river. Outside Chicago, there is one. The Army Corps runs current through the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal, the largest electric fish barrier in the world, to shock and turn back invasive carp swimming up the Mississippi system toward the Great Lakes. The two basins were never naturally linked. A canal dug over a century ago joined them, and now that man-made shortcut is the weak point. The only thing holding the line is electrified water. 8. The dead zone. Every summer, where the river finally reaches the Gulf, the oxygen bleeds out of the water and almost nothing can survive. This dead zone usually spreads across more than 5,000 square miles. In 2017, it hit a record near 8,800, roughly the size of New Jersey. The cause starts 1,000 miles upstream. Fertilizer washing off Midwest farms, carried down the river, feeding algae blooms that smother the sea. America's breadbasket drains every year into a suffocating hole in the ocean. 7. A second river. The Mississippi is a highway, but not only for water. The whole valley forms the Mississippi Flyway, and an estimated 40% of North America's migrating waterfowl and shorebirds follow it between Canada and the Gulf. They steer by the river itself, a flat, unmistakable ribbon pointing south in autumn and north in spring. Stand over the delta in migration season, and the sky fills with a second river, running the same direction as the first, made of wings instead of water. 6. Louisiana is dissolving. Here's the cruel twist. The Mississippi built southern Louisiana over thousands of years, dropping sediment and growing new land into the Gulf. Then we caged the river in levees to stop the floods, and choked off the very sediment that kept the coast alive. Now, Louisiana loses about a football field of land every 100 minutes, more than 2,000 square miles, an area bigger than Delaware, gone since the 1930s. We saved the towns from flooding and starved the ground they sit on. 5. The long drift. Drop a single raindrop into Lake Itasca and try to follow it to the sea. By the most cited estimate, it takes about 90 days, though that's a theoretical figure from speed and distance, and the real trip runs longer. Either way, the water leaving the headwaters today won't pass New Orleans for months, drifting 1 to 3 miles an hour across more than 2,300 miles. The Mississippi isn't really a place at all. It's a journey you only ever see one frozen frame of. 4. It ran backward. Those same 1811 to 1812 earthquakes did something stranger still. Eyewitnesses watched the Mississippi flow the wrong way. The ground heaved so violently it sent huge waves surging upstream, and for a few minutes, witnesses said, the river ran north. It may have been those waves more than a true reversal, but the aftermath was undeniable. When the land finally settled, a sunken stretch had filled with water, and Reelfoot Lake appeared in Tennessee, a brand new lake born in a single night. 3. The wandering mouth. The Mississippi has never settled on where to end. Over the last 7,000 years, it has built and abandoned 5 major deltas, swinging its outlet back and forth across the Louisiana coast like a hose dropped on a lawn. Today's Bird's Foot Delta below New Orleans is just the latest one. The older lobes lie drowned to the east and west, slowly sinking. The river doesn't really have a mouth. It has a current address and a long, restless history of moving out.
2. It's already escaping.
Just west of the main channel runs the Atchafalaya, a shorter, steeper route to the Gulf that reaches the sea in less than half the distance. And the lower Mississippi is nearly flat, dropping only about 160 feet over its final 600 miles. So the steeper path pulls hard. The river has been quietly leaking into the Atchafalaya for decades. By the 1950s, it had surrendered more than a fifth of its flow, and engineers realized the Mississippi was preparing to abandon its own channel for good. 1. Held by force. So why is the river still here? Why does it still roll past Baton Rouge and New Orleans instead of taking the easier way out? Because in the early 1960s, the Army Corps built something at Lettsworth, Louisiana to stop it. The Old River Control Structure, a fortress of concrete guarding the one spot where the Mississippi tries to slip into the Atchafalaya. Its only job is to keep the river from changing its mind. And it nearly failed. In the flood of 1973, the water clawed at its foundations and came within a breath of toppling it and setting the Mississippi loose down the shorter path. The Corps held on by inches, and they've held it every day since. So the river you see on every map, the one that splits the country in two, isn't where the land wants it. It's where we force it to stay. The Mississippi isn't a fixed line on a map. It's a standoff, a continent of moving water held against its will by a single wall built to tell it no. And one day, the water is going to win. That's the Mississippi, a river we've named, cut, caged, and pinned in place. For now. Subscribe, and we'll keep uncovering the country one hidden place at a time.